Great. Well, thanks for hosting. Great food, too. I mean, you can increase numbers just by advertising the quality of food that you have. Get people in. Yeah, that's great. So anyway, I've always been a big fan of Apex. I remember joining my local chapter. It was in Atlanta, Georgia, when I graduated school. Big part of my career development. So always happy to give back. I know I've spoken at Apex sessions over the past decade or so, and so I'm happy to talk about a number of subjects. This one, I honestly, I kind of kept kind of high level because I didn't know exactly kind of the focus area. I mean, inventory management is such a broad subject, and there's so many dimensions to it that each one of those dimensions could be a week-long training class. So I guess what I'll throw out there to you is if there's any of the little sound bites that I do or little examples that I share, if you ever want to do a deep dive session on it, and I'm like, hey, yeah, that looks good, but how do you actually do that? Then, hey, I'll come back and we can do a deep dive session and we can show you a case study. And then also another offer I'll do is, again, this new adventure is a startup. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. Where a lot of the same players are coming back together again, but we are bringing on board a lot of new folks. And as we start doing our process improvement events, our Kaizen program, I usually kind of open it up to kind of friends and family and partners. So if there's any folks that would like to participate in any of our Kaizen events in the future, hey, we always need another person, another set of hands. So it's a great opportunity to learn and to help contribute. So the one thing small companies don't have is a whole bunch of resources. So when we get our vendors and partners and other peers involved, that helps us and also provides some great fresh perspectives. Always good to have some outside folks, outside perspectives involved. But and then you get to learn a lot of hands-on stuff too. So some of the examples I'll show are things that we do. And we are doing, and we're doing more of. And you're never done with it. You're always, it's a never-ending journey. So there's lots of individual projects that are all kind of like little steps on a roadmap. And again, if you're ever interested in participating in any of those, love to have you involved. So again, my new adventure is called Acclaim. We are an aerospace company. That's my, since we do defense work, I have to have the little disclaimer on the, there's nothing confidential on this. Oh, that's weird. It didn't show up real well. Anyway, by conversion to PDF. But anyway, I'm going to talk to you about 4 things. So one is just a little bit about Acclaim, give you an example. Even though we're all in different industries, we share a lot of commonalities. We're not all that special when we kind of boil it down to it. I'm going to give you some of my perspectives on high mix, low volume. I'm in aerospace, but I'm sure you'll relate to some of these same challenges. And I've been into a lot of other manufacturing environments in the past. Kind of how we address it is by determining, we want to be part of a lean supply chain. And I think that's kind of indicative with every industry. I mean, every industry is kind of moving in the same direction. They all have similar goals, similar KPIs, similar requirements, similar downward pressure on their supply chain. Aerospace is a big part of that as well. And while we have great technology at our disposal, probably better than ever before, really a lot of the stuff that works the best hasn't changed in 70, 80 years since Deming started rolling it out, and the Toyota production system. So a lot of what we do is pretty low tech, I got to be honest. And I'm going to share some examples, and really some of the technology tools that we use today are just kind of like job aids, right? They just kind of help us do it a little easier and faster with a little less brute force. And I'll talk about some very specific Kaizen continuous improvement methods that we are using today in our current company, which is a little unique because it's a startup. So most of the time I've either kind of taken over large companies with lots of existing work. This one's kind of a blank sheet of paper. It's like, hey, if you've got a blank floor and just a whiteboard with nothing on it, how do you design a lean supply chain, lean flow, work cells, inventory management from the get-go? So it's it's a little scary, but it's pretty cool at the same time. So just a little bit about Acclaim. So we're actually in the process of kind of building out a new factory. It hasn't been formally announced yet. It's kind of coming out through a press release with Department of Commerce, but we'll be kind of in the Pelham Road area with all the other folks. Right now we got about 22 folks, but we'll be kind of marching on to 50, 60, 75, operating 24/7. We are a precision machining company. We're focused on aerospace and defense. There are some kind of ancillary markets that we kind of help with, but most of what we do is aerospace and defense projects. But we're turning metal into parts, no different than automotive or a die and mold manufacturer or anybody else. So we are a contract manufacturer. We don't invent anything. We have to kind of figure out how to make stuff sometimes. But we're getting three-dimensional CAD from folks like Boeing and Lockheed and Gulfstream, SpaceX, and folks like that. And then we have to figure out how to make it. And a lot of different metal alloys, from aluminum to titanium, nickel alloys, magnesium, all kinds of crazy stuff. We kind of have 4 core competencies, or the tools in our toolbox. CNC milling and CNC turning, so CNC machines that you probably may even have on your shop floor. And then we also do Swiss as well. So there are some real intricate small components, less than an inch diameter, oftentimes much less, that are part of fuel systems, control systems, valve systems, instrumentation. So we get into some real interesting micro parts. And then our quality systems as well, even though that kind of wraps over everything. It's a big part of what we do. It's kind of what makes us different than a regular machine shop. But it's also part of our value add as well. So again, that's probably no different. I kind of like to show things like that because it really makes it relatable to a lot of folks. Also, from a supply chain standpoint, even though the aerospace supply chain is a little bit more unique, it's really made up of the same stuff, right? We're all getting raw materials from somewhere, and they get their ingredients from somewhere. For our standpoint, Acclaim, sometimes we are a tier 1. Sometimes, and more often than not, we're actually a tier 2. So sometimes we're making something that goes right to a Boeing aircraft and bolts on it. Sometimes we're making a component or an assembly that goes into somebody else's assembly that then goes to a Boeing or Lockheed or et cetera aircraft. Again, no different than any of you guys. So kind of hands in the room. How much is how many folks here are like a tier 1? You're supplying directly to Ford or GM or Nissan or something like that. So we got one tier 1. So how many two? So how many are tier 2? And even tier 3, right? You're going even further, right? We got some folks that make cutting tools, right? So cutting tools that we use to make our parts So it's pretty distributed supply chain. In aerospace, it's really crazy fragmented. So very different than automotive, right? So Boeing, their high volume items, 737s, they only make 52. They were going up to 56 a month. And so down a little bit now. They got a little problem, but even that's the high runner, right? That's like the Toyota Camry of Boeing aircraft. It's 52 a month. They only make 12. Now 14 787 Dreamliners a month, and that's split between Charleston and Seattle. Now they're $280 million a piece, but it's only 12. And in aerospace, it's a super fragmented supply chain because, again, you may be making this one crazy complex titanium part, but you make 12, maybe 1 per ship set. So it's real fragmented, and it is very, very common for if you're awarded a part or you're making a part, you are the only supplier. You are the sole source supplier. There's nobody else. There's nobody cross-qualified. There's no secondary source. That's it. The vast majority of the parts. And there's a lot of parts, too. On the average automobile, there's like 30-something thousand typically, on the bill of materials. On aircraft, that's over 2.2 million. All right, there's a lot of stuff on an aircraft, head to toe. And just about every single one of those parts made by a sole source supplier. And the supply chain, as I mentioned, is very fragmented. So you got big companies like a Triumph Aerosystem or Spirit Aerosystem or GKN, or similar to the automotive folks. But really, they're doing assembly. So they're They may be making some components, but they're sourcing most of the stuff. So most of that stuff comes from smaller tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. And for example, there's in the machining world, there's about 23,000 machine shops in the United States. There's the vast majority of them, like 65-70% of them, are companies under 5 million in sales. So I mean, it's indicative of like a family-run business. So most of the aerospace supply chain is kind of like a bunch of dry cleaners, all kind of little family dry cleaners, making parts. So it's a really challenging supply chain. Again, because the volumes are low, and in your factory you may have a very, very high mix. So you have a lot of part numbers, and that don't often repeat all the time, or if they repeat, it's a few hours a month. So you're dealing with a very, very high mix. And changes to customer demand as well, just like a lot of other businesses. So anyway, just a little bit about the aerospace supply chain. So here's an example of something that we make. So we get a 3-dimensional CAD model. This is kind of a system that goes on a door, inside a door of an Air Force tanker, a cargo door mechanism. So it starts off as a piece of 7050 aluminum billet, and there's some 5-axis machining involved, and also some assembly, some bushings and bearings, and some gear components that we assemble. And it turns into a minor assembly, and then it goes to our customer, who's sticking it on the Air Force tanker door and integrating it into the fuselage. So in this case, we're a tier 2. It's an Air Force tanker. They make like 8 a year. That's about it. So there's a lot of work involved to make 8. Then maybe they get it right, maybe the government continues on, maybe they purchase some more, maybe Congress doesn't change, and then they get another order for 8 next year. So there's a lot of challenges in aerospace, and not a lot of room for error either, because there's no AAA to call if something happens right in aircraft. Can't pull off to the side of the road. Bad things happen. So you've got this distributed supply chain, very, very fragmented, and low volumes, and no room for error. So some challenges in high mix, low volume. People in the room, would you all consider yourself kind of high mix, low volume? Are there any just high volume manufacturers? You got a couple of gizmos in your factory and you're just churning out 10,000 a day. I mean, is there anybody like that?
We've
got some cutting tools, right? You probably have some.
We have a couple hundred parts that are high volume, and then, as we said, we've got tens to hundreds of thousands of potential SKUs that could happen, and so we've got a whole bunch of these dog items. Gotcha, right. So everybody's done a Pareto chart, right, of their products, right? And most people have like top 15 or 20%, right, that make up the majority of the volume. They got all their crap, right, that you have to fill the orders in. Right? Got it. So we're all in the same boat. I think everybody's got kind of a good definition of high mix, low volume. But this is kind of a universal kind of matrix that's used. So at one end of the spectrum, we got folks that are more continuous flow processes like milk, right? You're making milk every day, maybe 20, 30, 40 years, maybe a 5th generation family farm, right? You're making milk, right? Putting it in containers and shipping it, right? So that's about as clear as you can get of continuous flow, low mix. We make milk, maybe you make a low skim, maybe a skim milk or something, right? And then you kind of work your way up, and on the other end of the spectrum is the job shop, right? So if we're doing nothing but prototypes or a custom furniture maker, right? Hey, I need this new mantle that goes over my antique house that we're doing a reno. You're making one, right? So the prototype job shop manufacturer. You may only make one, you may never make it again. In our business, we do a lot of prototypes because there's a lot of new aircraft designs that are always happening, and we want to be participating in those so that you have a leg up if and when those turn into contract opportunities. So a lot of times you can't just say, well, just give me the gravy stuff that's you got 5-year contracts on. Sometimes it's, hey, we need one of these made. We're going to put it on a test engine, fire it, see if it blows up. And if it works, maybe we'll order another one next year. So there's a lot of these onesie-twosie prototypes that we have to do So we have a job shop part of our business. Do any of you have kind of what I call job shop parts of your business, doing prototypes or custom stuff? Anybody do any custom stuff? Custom, make the engineering, make the design? Very, very challenging, right? There's no router for this. There's no bill of materials. We have to go figure it out. Right? And you may never make it again. It's like, gosh, by the time you put this thing in the ERP system, it's shipped out the door and never even make it. Might as well hit the delete button, right? All it's doing is just populate more garbage in the Oracle database, right? So high mix examples, again, as I mentioned, there's like 2.2 million parts on the average aircraft, even more on the more advanced aircraft like the 787. And a claim, we make components that go into the airframe or structures and systems, and also engines and turbines. So we're making components that go into the fuel nozzle system and the combustion section. And some of those are like high volume. It's like, ooh, we make 500 of something a month. That's like, wow, that's really high volume in aerospace. A lot of the stuff we make is in the kind of the dozen range. So very, very low volume considering. But we all have the evil inventory that we have to deal with. And personally, I don't believe in a zero inventory philosophy, because I think it can put too much strain and stress on an organization, because there's just variation in every process. In a perfect world, you can design something with zero inventory, but if anything happens, what's the cost of shutting down or disruption? Especially the cost of your customer shutdown. If anybody's a BMW supplier, you know the cost of shutting down their assembly line, right? It's not fun, right? You don't want to be that supplier. So most of us, well, maybe the OEM has zero inventory, like, hey, we're not going to have any inventory. That just means, well, you suppliers just have to carry more, right? So there's a lot of arguments that can be had here. This is a good debate slide, but the real point that I'm trying to make is the cost of having inventory and having to manage it is a lot more than just the cost of the materials and even the labor content. I know most of our financial friends and accounting systems, will kind of measure that from a balance sheet standpoint. But the reality is there's a lot of cost tied up into inventory, and the longer that stuff hangs around, the more cost it just racks up over and over again. And these are just some examples. And honestly, the thing I like to talk about the most is the opportunity cost. Because as long as we have inventory, or as long as we have to carry inventory, or we have to make inventory, or buffer, or just in case inventory, that's taking up time, money, effort, resources that we could be doing something else with. So the financial friends, they like to talk about the money side of inventory, but I'm always looking at the opportunity. What could I have done with my people, resources, assets if I didn't have that inventory tied up? And honestly, I think it's a lot greater than that. But this is kind of a safe range. Hell, even if you put 25%, right? That's a lot. So if anybody has visibility here of your inventory, I mean, look at how much 25% of your inventory that you've got on the books right now. How much is that worth? What could you do if you had that money freed up as cash flow, or you can invest in capacity, or new equipment, or job training, right? I mean, that's the opportunity, right? And then how do you put a price on that? How do you put a price on redeploying those dollars to upgrade 100 of your staff and get them from point A to point B from a skill set standpoint? I mean, what is that worth to your organization? So it's a lot more than just, making the CFO happy, freeing up the cash flow on the balance sheet. Stop coming through a little bit. So I like to focus on the lean supply chain. There's a lot of cool lean stuff, lean tools that we can learn through certifications, that we can do things in our factory. But I like to talk about an integrated approach, because I think it's hard just to stay inwardly focused if you don't really look holistically at your whole supply chain, all the inputs and outputs. Then I think it could lead at a minimum, bad decisions, but again, a lot of lost opportunity, because there's so many things that are intertwined. It's hard to just kind of compartmentalize and say, I'm going to do a lean event, over here, we're going to fix that. And it doesn't really work that way. You can't really look at it as individual tools in a toolbox and pick and choose what you want to work. You really have to start with a big picture. But the thing that I like to focus on, though, is what in your business is value add and non-value add, because our financial reports, our ERP systems, I mean, I don't know about you, but most ERP systems don't have a report that says, show me my non-value add or value add, give me that report, right? Or what's non-value added in that department, right? Maybe you got cost accounting, but it's amazing how no systems really kind of address that. And that's where really a lot of low-tech kind of tools come in play. But one of the things that I like to preach is a different kind of cycle time, and that's what I call business cycle time. And being a business owner, somebody who has to make payroll, doesn't just kind of fall out of the sky. We look at business cycle time. Let me explain to you how a business owner describes business cycle time. It's when I get the order, when I get the PO, right? It may have taken me, 3 months, steak dinners, whatever, to get, with the customer. Sometimes I get lucky and find an immediate opportunity, but purchase order, boom, clock's ticking. That's what I talk about, start of the business cycle time clock. I get the PO, now we have to either plan or purchase raw materials. Maybe there's hardware, supplies, we have to engage labor. All right, there's labor on the front end from admin, planning. If it's a new thing, maybe we got to create routers and do the engineering design and CNC programs and figure out what tools we got to buy and buy tools from tool manufacturers, all that front-loaded stuff, right? And we haven't got a dang dollar yet. We got a PO, there's no cash in our pocket yet, right? So we're planning, we're order processing. We've just found that they gave us a PO and it's got the wrong revision number on it, so we got to go back and say, wait a minute, thanks for the order, but that's not the revision that we quoted. Can you get us the right blueprint? Anyway, all that stuff. All right, there's another week, right? Sorry, we ordered the materials first, right? Now we got a design discrepancy, right? So there's another week tied up. Then we got to plan it, right? And then we got to load it in we do have an ERP system. We got to create our routers. We've got to be AS9100 compliant, which is like ISO on steroids. We've got to figure out what machines we're going to run it on. We've got to have people produce it. All the steps involved in planning. And it's no different than any other business. Then we have to make it, and that's like where all our focus is, right? The minute that thing hits the machine, then we're on it. We got to be right. Get it off that machine as fast as we can. That's where we're adding value. And then for some things we're assembling. Some things we have an extended supply chain. Not everything we make just gets put in a box and shipped. There are things that have to be heat treated. There's stuff that has to be special coated and plated, like electroless nickel or a chrome plating or all kinds of prime and paint. Just depends on where it is on the aircraft or in the engine. There could be additional after processes involved, like grinding, part marking, assembly with other doodads that we made to create a master assembly. And then it finally gets packaged and finally shipped. And then how many of your customers pay immediately as soon as you ship it, right? They've got the dollar bills are already floating, right? No, none of mine, right? So it's net 30, net 45, net 60, net 90. I've had some customers in the past who are net 120. I mean, give me a break, right? It's like, I'm not a bank, I'm a manufacturer, right? So how many of you have net 90 customers, right? Right, we'll try making stuff for the government, right? So net 90, right? So over here is when the clock started, though. This is when we started spending money. And then now if this is a perpetual project, well, now we've got to carry inventory. Great, we just got awarded a 5-year contract with Boeing because of lead times of raw materials and all the things that happen. We can't just buy what we need right then and ship it and then get paid 90 days later. Well, we got to carry inventory and supplies, and really you could have money tied up a whole year when you get down to it. And that's where some of those numbers, and it's taking up floor space. It's not just the money that's tied up in the raw materials and the product that's in a box on the shelf. It's the floor space, who's got to count it, manage it. There's a lot of cost involved. So I like to talk business cycle time. So a lot of our lean events, we talk about let's videotape the stuff on the floor and look at how we're setting up, and here's when it started, and oh my God, my setup time is 4 hours later. Who cares? Who cares if you cut that thing in half? Because this is what usually happens. We're so focused on the value add portion of just, machining, for example. So we consider value added, when we stick a raw piece of metal in the CNC machine, hit the button and go, maybe that's 4 hours, right? And then maybe it took us, this would be a super fast order, right? A week, get the materials in, program it, machine it. So if that was a week order, and we magically bought the materials and got paid the day we shipped it, right? The business cycle time, 168 hours, well, our value add time's 2.4%. But really, if you explode that out, what about the order processing, planning, engineering, all that other stuff, right? And then the assembly, shipping, waiting on the money to be. So really, if you start kind of compressing this down, it's like 0.04% is the kind of the value add time to the business cycle time, not just the manufacturing cycle time. But this is where we usually kind of put all of our focus. So, hey, let's do setup reduction, which is important, and we like to do. Let's go buy a faster machine. We need to upgrade our equipment, right? This old stuff, got to get it out. We need something that's twice as fast. Great. Let's say you spend $10 million and you get a machine that's twice as fast. Great, I just cut this value added portion in half. Fantastic. Well, what about all the other stuff, right? So really, yeah, you've made a gain, but it's kind of almost inconsequential to the business cycle time. So that's where I really like to look at the non-value added. Making a 50% improvement just on the equipment, the assets. Well, what if we made it in the supply chain? What if we made it in our inventory management and the overall big picture? It's a lot bigger scope. So how many folks are familiar with Kaizen? Anybody involved in that in your company? Is it a formal part of the company? So how many of you would say it's a program at your company? All right. How many would you say it's part of the DNA of the company? It's how you do stuff. Right, so that's actually what Kaizen really means. So I was fortunate when I came out of Georgia Tech. I worked with a progressive company that hired a sensei from Toyota production, and they didn't call it Kaizen or Lean back then. You call it Kaizen, but it's really more of a philosophy. It's not a program. It's just how we do stuff. And then us Americans had to kind of name it and brand it because that's kind of how we digest things. But it's really a philosophy, and it's how we do stuff. And it's really a part of the culture, and it's about really getting the people involved for constant continuous improvement, and it's about kind of an all-out war on that non-value added area. It's not just about the machinery, but time and inventory is a big part of it. And it's holistic. It's not just some lean tools to go tackle setup reduction. That being said, there are some categories of tools and really knowledge, right? I like to kind of talk about this as chapters in a book, right? Just like how you couldn't just pick up a book and read one chapter, and it wouldn't make sense. But a lot of times we learn and do lean, like reading one chapter in a book and not even reading the rest. Like, we're just going to do 5S, or we're going to do setup reduction, or we're going to do an inventory reduction, and it doesn't work like that. You have to read all the chapters of a book. And these aren't necessarily all the pillars, but this is kind of our Kaizen strategy. And each one of these is a session or training in itself. There's a couple that I want to talk about and the knowledge base that we pull from when we tackle inventory. Because again, in this company, we're a startup, so we're kind of tackling it from the get-go. How can we deploy and integrate these things into our planning so as we bring things online, it has minimum and optimum inventory management from the get-go. Lots of companies call this different. I guess the classical term is 7 waste, but I think more people would call it the 8 waste now, or 7+1. But if you take a look at, if you step back and say, why do we have inventory? Or inventory is necessary? Well, maybe that's the case, but how much? But the goal is to step back and say why. Why do you have inventory? It is a form of waste. Stock is a form of waste, for sure. But it's also caused by a lot of the other waste. The reason you have inventory, the reason we have safety stock and inventory in between stuff is because of one or more of all the others, and usually a combination. Usually all of them, right? And maybe one is of greater cause, but the reason we have inventory in the first place is because we have waste. And I don't know about you, but it's a lot easier to manage inventory when you have a lot less of it. So before you go out and launch and implement a lot of sophisticated systems, how about try to reduce inventory as much as possible with the tools you have, and get it down before you spend money? Because even if you go out and buy a new ERP system or bring in a lot of consultants, doesn't matter, even if you have all the money in the world, it still takes time and it requires change. So before you start doing something new, focusing on what you have to try to reduce inventory as much as possible. Then technology systems can kind of help. The first thing that I start with is value stream mapping. Value stream mapping, there are tools to do value stream mapping, but again, like Kaizen, it's a philosophy. It's not that, hey, this is just something we're going to do to check the box, like, hey, I did a value stream map, I'm going to put it on the wall and look what we did, and then nobody looks at it anymore, right? Value stream, it should be living, breathing documents. We should be managing your business with a value stream map because it changes. It's a source of your productivity measurements, is your value stream map. That can actually become your KPIs. It's not just a check the box thing that you do. Because it really does take a holistic look at your whole business. It's not just material flow. It's not just a spaghetti diagram for 5S. It looks at everything that goes in and out to generate your business. But it's really, really hard. Value stream mapping is really, really hard. And there are some really good books and training just to do value stream mapping. And it's really important to spend time to practice and get it right because it is so hard and you got to get down to a minutia level of detail. Most people don't do it well. And it really does just become a kind of check the box exercise. Because a lot of us do have a lot of part numbers. And if you just kind of emotionally pick one, like, oh, this part number or this customer, oh, we need to tackle this one's causing us all kinds of problems. Well, how do you know that? How do you know you're not missing something else? So there are methodologies to use to start a value stream mapping initiative. And this is kind of like my summary. And for any of these slides, there's backup information. I'm going to show you some templates and tools that I use. I give this stuff away. I'm not here to sell you anything. I mean, unless you want to, nobody's here ready to like buy a rocket or a warhead or anything, right? So you got a PO and I'll talk to you. But everything else, otherwise, I'll give it to you for free. Or I don't want anything. Thanks for the dinner and the drinks. That's good. May have you back and I'll share some more. But so anyway, anything you guys want, I've got tons of archives. Anything I can do to help your business, just let me know. Hey, you got some info on that slide? Send me an email. Great. I'll email you whatever I have. There's no copyrights. But this is kind of the method we're using. This is what we're using with a blank sheet of paper. So as we get all these customer orders in, instead of just going, great, just put them in the ERP system and generate work orders. Go, go, go. All right, and just stick machines over there. So we're doing it. We're doing lean. We're using these tools to do a lean design of our factory, and it's going to change as well. Because there are going to be some assets that kind of do a little bit of everything in the beginning, and then as things grow and evolve, then it may make sense to kind of alter that design and change the layout and change what's running on those machines or assets. But this is kind of the process that we go through, and honestly, a lot of it starts with a good old Pareto chart. It really does. Whether I've done a business turnaround, taken over a failing business, or starting up a brand new one, we are constantly doing Pareto charts. And more than just a Pareto chart, has anybody heard of a PQRS analysis? So that's something I would encourage you to Google. And I'll give you some. So if you do a little homework, and then you come back to me, hey, Jason, give me your PQRS stuff, then I'll give it to you, right? I want you to do a little homework. So it goes beyond the Pareto chart. It's part of the Toyota production system. There's some great tools there, but it helps you get beyond just the Pareto chart because there's more to it than just volume. So for example, you could have a large customer or a large product that has few transactions. So you could have a product that few transactions generates a lot of revenue. You could have another product that generates more revenue per year, but it has a boatload of transactions, right? Death by 1,000 cuts. So, but this one's more volume, but does it flow the same as this other product? You may have another customer that generates a lot of transactions, no revenue, right? And maybe they take up maybe they don't take up a lot of machine capacity, but they take a lot of order processing and engineering capacity. So that PQRS, S is actually fancy for the dollar sign, right? So that's a really, really important strategy. And you need to do that before you do a value stream analysis. So your PQRS analysis helps you identify and segment product families into a matrix, where then you can actually start to compartmentalize stuff. And then you create product families, but not just product families because, this product family green goes on these same machines, right? Goes way beyond that. It has to deal with flow, the frequency, the dollars, the rate. That's how PQRS analysis really flows into value stream mapping. And once you kind of start down that path, then through a team effort, then you can create charters as to why it makes sense to go out and map out these value streams. What is our current state, and then what it could be. And where value stream mapping is different, it's not just process mapping. There is kind of a current state process, but most companies get so hung up on just value stream mapping the current state and spending all their time there that they don't really improve anything. they just, great, you just documented the mess you're in, right? But value stream mapping really is a challenge. It's by making things more visible and by applying your lean principles, you start to ask why. Like, well, why do we have to carry inventory between these departments? Why do we carry that much inventory? What if we didn't? What would it look like if we took these things down to zero, right? You start there. And this is kind of this is a real example. It's a simplified example, but it's a real example. And it's amazing how eye-opening it is, because you start pulling in people from different departments and they know this stuff, but they don't know the whole picture. And you go, holy crap, we've got 24 days of inventory. If we took that camera right there and went snap, there's 24 days of inventory. How much is that worth? Just the monetary value of it. Then the opportunity value is taking up floor space. People are having to manage it. We could have been doing this on this machine, or this person could have been doing something else. Or what if they didn't have to manage this inventory? What if they just did setup production? If you just wanted to do that, right? What could you do with your time if you weren't managing all this crap? And then obviously the cycle times, right? Well, we get kind of hung up on this part. This is where the money is, right here. And then obviously that's just one little segment. And you start kind of putting it together. And now how do you get there? How do you process those orders? What's the frequency? Is there a demand? And you start putting all these things together. You start getting a big picture of it. And there's tools to use to be able to dissect that. There's some pretty fancy software out there to do value stream mapping. It's pretty slick. We've been using an Excel. I've been using this for years. So I'll give this to you. Just email me. I'll give it to you. It's not going to do all the whiz-bang stuff, but it's pretty cool if you're starting out. So it's an Excel spreadsheet, and you can kind of arrange icons and develop it, and it'll do the calculations for you. So I'm happy to give that to you. There's other tools that I have to help do value stream mapping, kind of when you drill down and like, okay, how do you get to that level? How do you figure out your min-max inventories? And what are all this is all nice and good here on a high level, but there's actually 100 part numbers that all flow. And how do you manage those 100 part numbers? Not just a fancy flow chart. Well, before you just throw an ERP system at it, there are very valuable Excel spreadsheet tools that have been developed. I'm happy to give these to you. That'll help you plan. And it's good for workshopping because you can get a team up to speed in using an Excel spreadsheet, especially on a big display and everybody's contributing, a lot faster than trying to get everybody trained on SAP, right? And then if you want to implement SAP, then your workshops will then flow into it, but this is kind of your dry run. And I'll tell you, the last company that when I sold my other company in 2014, I was helping Korean conglomerate set up shop in the U.S. We managed 10,000 different parts for multiple different divisions of Lockheed, and we did it with an Excel spreadsheet. And we upgraded and implemented an ERP system to help us, but we were managing 100% on-time delivery. We were an elite supplier to Lockheed. We got awards, best supplier of the year, using Microsoft Excel. And record profits. So, and everybody could participate in it. So, I love technology. I'm a techno geek, but the value of being able to have your team involved to use tools that are more trainable and user-friendly, I'd start there. If you can't successfully plan with Excel, how in the world are you going to use a sophisticated tool like SAP? And even if you're using SAP and you can't go against your company because it's up here, it's eight layers above you, that's okay. But you can deploy, you can do Kaizen with Excel spreadsheets yourself, right? So what can you control? What tools can you use to make incremental improvements? Doesn't have to be binary, all or nothing. There's now once you start doing value, it's not showing up real well because of the export, but then there's other tools that are part of the lean system that can help you do something with that information. So now that once you've got a value stream map, how do you develop takt times? And even in a job shop environment, there's still things you can boil down to create a pace and certain subcategories. So looking at takt time and work cell designs and systematic layout, or SLP, looking at relationships of these flows. So if you are going to start creating things in value streams, how does that flow through your factory? And even it's more interesting even when you start kind of looking at a map for logistics and how your suppliers, where your suppliers are as well. How many people have heard of SLP, systematic layout planning? So it's more of like a classical industrial engineering toolkit. Probably the biggest thing is the lowest tech thing of it all, and that's visual management. Simple things that help ensure kind of FIFO to making sure what we scheduled gets run, making sure what we ran gets shipped, making sure what we didn't run gets returned back to inventory. Visual. So how many ways can you color code stuff? Just about everybody understands red, yellow, green, right? It's very trainable, very, very low learning curve. So how visual is your factory? And not just for 5S, putting tape on the floor and shadowboarding tools, but is your inventory 5S? Is your materials 5S? Is your work in process 5S? How does somebody know what to run next, where to go? Can somebody without a computer or any report whatsoever just look at the floor and go, because those work in process squares are filled up and I know this flow rack square, that is $84,000 of inventory. That's when you know you got it. When you could go to somebody on second shift or third shift, right now and say, hey, Joe, look on the factory floor real quick, line of sight, how much inventory do we have? It's like, we got this much. All right, when you have that much ownership, that's critical. All right, that's different than, everybody talks about ownership, but I like to talk about shareholders, right? So, and even if you're not, even if you don't own part of the company, most of you have 401ks that are dependent on your company's success. So really, you are a shareholder. You're a shareholder in your company's success, right? And it's shocking when people really understand the inventory. They may know the order, right? Oh, okay, well, this order I'm working on, it's worth this much. But then I look at around this work area, I'm like, holy crap, I got like 5 times my annual salary tied up just right now in the inventory. Wow. I mean, when people can actually see and calculate the numbers without any manager telling them what it is, no report,
that's when the magic happens. Because that's when the ideas start kicking in and people start coming up with, oh, if we did this and moved this around, I could cut that in half. Visual, visual, visual. So don't limit lean to just shadowboarding tools and putting tape on the floor, all right? Apply it towards your inventory. It's the most important thing we do, is applying the lean principles, the visual principles to our inventory and material flow, especially in aerospace, because everything's got to be certified and regulated. If something gets out of place, then it's like, you got to throw the whole stuff out because you can't trace it anymore. This doesn't show up real well, but now so we're about a year and a half into our journey, and just now into our startup. So just now are we rolling out a new ERP system. So we've got a cloud-based ERP system. It's for the machining industry. It's called ProShop. It's pretty slick. It doesn't really show up real well. Sorry, the exported ones, but it has visual production schedules, visual inventory management. So it does kind of help us go beyond the limitations of Excel, and it's hard to collaborate with Excel in real time and having people update stuff, right? It gets kind of clunky after a while, especially if you want to have a team involved, right? It's hard for a team, multiple shifts to all use Microsoft Excel. It's like, oh, I can't get my VPN, right? It's like, get rid of that. So this didn't show up real well, but a visual Gantt board so that we can actually see start to finish. We do have some sequential relationships on jobs that have to start. Some things can run in parallel, but how do we know that we've loaded the work? And not just from a schedule standpoint, what's that going to do to our inventory calculation? So when I said before, it's like, I wish I had a button that would say how much inventory I got tied up or what's non-value added. We have it now. So now systems are coming online that allow teams visual scanning boards. We don't have to just schedule in Microsoft Excel. We can do what-if analysis. Well, what if I, move this job around? Oh, this great customer of ours called. They want a miracle. They want us to bump everything else. Now instead of 3 weeks, they need it now. Like that doesn't happen in your business, right? So you'd think like Boeing, they're making these airplanes every month. It's like, what could change? It's stuff all the time. It's like, hey, I need that stuff now, not 30 days from now. Throws a monkey wrench in. Well, we just laid out our plans, ordered materials. Now we got to throw it all out, start over again. And so this is where software tools really do help, because now we can run what-if analysis, and I can say, oh, crap, well, I solved one customer problem, but I just created 10 more. And then it's going to create a whipsaw effect. It's going to screw everything up. Or from a small business, so I don't have a mothership corporate in Detroit that's going to just bail me out, right? So if I don't make payroll, it kind of sucks. So if we overcommit, if we have too much stuff tied up in inventory and we don't get stuff out the door and shipped, we don't have enough money to make payroll, right? So we have to think about how we're scheduling and loading up stuff, because all of a sudden we could have all our money tied up in inventory. It's like our P&L is looking good, man. It was super profits. Like we had a killer month. Like, dang, well, how come we don't have any money in the bank? It's all sitting on the shelf or in WIP or on a truck going to Electrolux nickel plater in New York or something like that, right? So cash flow management is super, super critical. And that's what some of these tools can kind of help us with as well, especially FIFO management and especially if you had traceability requirements. So I don't get anything out of it. ProShop, they're a startup as well. But it's a pretty slick cloud-based ERP system, and there's a lot more offerings like that. So again, I know this kind of touch base on a lot of high-level stuff, and there's each one of these subjects deserves a deep dive. So if you ever are interested in wanting to go in deeper, like, hey, hey, that Hijunka board that you have there on the shop floor, that's really cool. Like, well, how did you get that? Like, how did you take these 1,000 part numbers and then, color code them and get there? Like, we can do a workshop on that if you're interested, and we can do a little case study. Any questions? So I kind of threw a lot at you, but if there's any areas that you have questions on before you need to break, I'm happy to answer to the best of my ability.